Welcome to Cybersecurity Heroes, an Iron Scales podcast about you, the heroes of cybersecurity. You're about to hear and learn practical and experiential knowledge in our conversations with CISOs, security directors and architects, SOC analysts, and other InfoSec stars so we can become more cyber resilient and safer together. Let's get into the show.
Welcome to Cybersecurity Heroes. I'm your host for today's episode, Brendan Rudd, Director of Lifecycle Marketing at Iron Scales, an email security platform powered by AI, enhanced by thousands of customer security teams, and built around detecting and removing threats in the inbox. Today I'm joined by Christian Espinoza, best-selling author of The Smartest Person in the Room, cybersecurity leader, keynote speaker, veteran, and the list goes on, but I'll let Christian fill you in on the rest. So hey, Christian, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, Brendan. Happy to be here. I'll give you a little bit of background, kind of a condensed version. I grew up in Arkansas, very poor, didn't have a lot of options, so I applied to all the military academies. I watched Top Gun and kind of got inspired to join the military. I got accepted into all three of them. I ended up going to the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. I graduated in 1993, and that's when I sort of started my career in IT and cybersecurity. I went to like 5 months of training in Biloxi, Mississippi, and my first job was really IT-based, but we also had, government secrets and classified networks and things like that. So there was always a cybersecurity component to my IT career when I started the military. And then in 1999, I got out of the military, I transitioned, and I wanted to focus my career more so on cybersecurity. So I got, all the certifications. I got the MCSE plus security, the Cisco certified security professional, CISSP, CISA. I worked hard on learning the industry early on and then getting the experience. And I had a couple jobs as a defense contractor. So I traveled around the different Air Force bases and optimized their networks and helped secure them. I worked for DHS for a while. I did commercial pen testing for commercial aircraft. And then I did a lot of freelance work where I did a lot of training. So I probably have taught, a couple hundred classes over the years, like CISSP boot camps, penetration testing, forensics. I've taught quite a few courses, including custom courses. And then in 2014, I started my company, Alpine Security, and I sold it to Cerberus Sentinel in 2020, actually. So right now, I'm a managing director for Cerberus Sentinel, and my brand, Alpine Security, still exists, just under a parent company, Cerberus Sentinel.
That's really interesting, and I think there was even a mention of 24 times or 12 times Ironman.
Yeah, I didn't mention the Ironman. I've done 24 Ironman triathlons. I just did one in Tulsa a couple weeks ago.
That's awesome. Yeah. So we have a great episode today, breaking down some of the concepts and chapters straight out of your book. So I'd like to open the show using the first chapter from your book. Why are we losing the war on cybersecurity?
Yeah, I think there's three main reasons that I talk about, all three of these in the book, actually. The first one is egos. I think in our industry in cybersecurity and in any industry where you have super smart people that are, very intellectually smart, part of their identity is to be smarter than other people. So when that's part of your identity, you do things to prove you're smarter than other people, and those same things inhibit communication with clients, with management, with your team, because if you're always speaking over someone's head and you feel like they're stupid because they don't understand what you're saying, then they're not going to understand it, right? And we need to learn to alter our communication. So egos is one of them. And also, there's a lot of gatekeepers in the industry that are keeping people from joining the industry, which is contributing to the skill shortage in my mind. And that again is the ego, because if I'm like a hiring manager and I have a 4-year degree and I've got a CISSP and a Sec Plus, then I'm not going to want to hire someone that doesn't have those same things, because otherwise it'd be devaluing my own, my own skills or my own credentials, basically. So there's a lot of kind of resistance to bringing people into the career field for some reason, even for entry-level positions. So egos are number one. Second reason is lack of risk comprehension. Based on my experience of almost 30 years in the industry, I don't think a lot of people in cybersecurity really understand risk. They may understand a vulnerability, but they don't really tie that to an impact. And how that shows up is we try to protect everything equally because there's no priorities. And I'm a believer that you can't protect everything equally. You've got limited resources, so you need to prioritize what you protect. And I used to work with this guy, and this is a good example, I always think of this, where he had these two projects he was working on, and he went to ask his boss, he said, which of these two take priority? And his boss told them they are both equal priority. And this guy I used to work with said, okay, I guess I'll do both of them half-ass, meaning, you can't do everything equally well. And in cybersecurity, we try to do everything equally well, which is problematic. We should focus on the top things that matter. And then the third thing is complication. I think we overly complicate cybersecurity, not just with acronyms and with frameworks, but pretty much everything. And cybersecurity is not really a subculture anymore. We've sort of been integrated into mainstream, so we need to stop acting like we're a subculture where there's special language and special behavior, because it makes it difficult for other people to understand. And even me, who's been in the industry for like 30 years, I hear things every day that I don't understand or don't know. Like I was doing a news interview like a couple weeks ago, it was probably a month ago, and somebody asked me what I thought about comb. And I was like, comb? Like, what the hell is comb? And it's COMB is the compilation of many breaches. So we just have to keep complicating these things with new acronyms too. It's amazing to me.
Yeah, I want to go back for a second, if you don't mind. You mentioned egos. So where did you first kind of see this ego in reviewing resumes and being a gatekeeper, and what solution could you propose to overcome that?
I had been aware of it, like in the background for most of my career. But when I started Alpine Security in 2014, my company, and started hiring people and having them hire other people and having them work together, that's really when it all sort of like clicked to me, and I was able to connect the dots backwards. And then when I connected the dots backwards, I thought about other places I'd worked where somebody that has like a 4-year degree, and I've taught at a university for a while too, taught master's level cybersecurity courses. I have that background as well. But what I noticed is people that have a 4-year degree and certifications, and that's how they got into cybersecurity back in the day, and that's how they entered cybersecurity. So they're doing an entry-level position with a 4-year degree and maybe a Sec Plus, right? Then those people are now in charge of hiring other people. And they feel like, as I sort of alluded to, that, I had to have this stuff coming into the industry, so why shouldn't everybody else have to have these things as well? And when I refer to gatekeepers, that's what I'm talking about. And I'm a believer that, we've got the skills gap. We all talk about it, but it's largely BS because of, this 4-year degree and this certification requirement. And for an entry-level position in cybersecurity, if you're a tier 1 SOC analyst, if you're doing, auditing, there's certain things that you don't need a 4-year degree. Even if you're a penetration tester, you don't need a 4-year degree. So I think we need to shift the mindset from this 4-year degree requirement to looking at people that can add value to our organization that don't have a 4-year degree. Like there's a lot of veterans transitioning out of the military with 20 years of military experience without a 4-year college degree. I would find it difficult for someone to say, this veteran can't add any value to an entry-level cybersecurity position.
And if I would add my 2 cents to this topic, it feels like this mentality is coming from pre-digital transformation era, when information was not as accessible as it is today, and you can really teach yourself pretty much everything about cybersecurity via communities, Google, your network, social media. Would you say that is playing a role in why people don't necessarily need all the certs and stuff like that in today's modern era?
Yes, 100%. I think universities and colleges are teetering on obsolescence, because why should I spend hundreds of thousands of dollars going to a college for 4 years and taking courses that may not necessarily serve me, like history and political science and stuff, if I know I just want to focus on cybersecurity. If I just want to focus on that, you can watch YouTube videos, you can go to Udemy, there's lots of free content out there. You can build your own lab. So there's lots of things you can do to become an expert in these areas without having to go to college. And I think we're shifting sort of from the older educational model where you had to go to university to learn something to more of a self-education model, because like you said, there's plenty of information available today for people to learn on their own. And there's plenty of mentors out there too that want to help other people as well.
Right. Definitely. I'm seeing a lot of that lately. So moving on, you also bring up an interesting debate early on in your book about whether a CISO should be technical.
Well, ideally, a CISO is both technical and understands business. The challenge is if you're purely technical and don't make the effort to understand business and communication and how to talk to stakeholders, that's where this breaks down. I've seen lots of CISOs that were promoted from a position where they're super technical to a CISO, and they think the same skill set works in that position. It does not. If you're talking to a board of directors, they don't care if you can explain a /23 subnet. They need to know what's the risk that this cybersecurity concern imposes on the organization, and what's the cost, and how do we fix that, and what's the exposure. So that the business acumen, the communication, the skills need to be shifted if you're technical. And I think if I had to pick one of the two, I would pick somebody with the business skills versus the technical skills. But ideally, they have both.
Mm-hmm. And I know you also disagreed with the idea, and it's not just you, I've heard it before, but I'd love to get your inputs on the idea of being compliant means you're more secure.
Well, if I look at a Venn diagram, you've got like security is a big circle, compliance is a little circle that sort of covers a little bit of security. The compliance it serves a purpose, but from my experience, and if the industry's experience, we have many organizations that are HIPAA compliant, PCI compliant. They're compliant with all this stuff, but they've all been compromised. So it should tell you that compliance does not equal security. So I think there's a place for compliance, but I think there's too much emphasis placed on it.
And air quotes here, employee talent shortage. What advice can you give to employers who think there is a talent shortage?
As employers, we need to look at alternative pipelines. I think a lot of employers are thinking sort of antiquated models, right? Like the colleges should be supplying us a pipeline of candidates, so I just have to say, oh, they have a degree in this, check, and I can just hire them and they know what they're doing. Or the certification bodies are supplying me a pipeline of candidates. They have a CEH, a CISSP, a Sec Plus, check. I just hire them and they know what they're doing. So the employers need to shift that and take some responsibility on their own shoulders about hiring people and training them. And one of the things that I did when I had my own company is I used to think I just need to hire people based on how technically smart they were. And I realized that almost every problem I had in my organization was not because somebody wasn't technically smart enough. It was because somebody didn't have people skills. So since then, I sort of flipped the script on hiring, and I looked for people that were a good cultural fit, met our core values, they had passion about cybersecurity, and they had the right attitude and the right aptitude. And then if they have those things, I could teach them as an employer. I could teach them the technical skills with on-the-job training, help them go through Sec Plus material, or whatever they need to know from a foundational perspective, and help them succeed in their career. A lot of employers, though, think, well, if I train somebody, then they're going to leave and go somewhere else. There's always a risk, but you have to do other things in your culture to want to keep that person working there with you.
So, this is quite a hot topic of debate, at least in my feed. I see people saying, no, you got to hit the ground running. There is no training. Is it really that black and white? I would imagine certain companies just don't have the capabilities to train. Like, would you say bigger companies would be able to train people? I'm just trying to put, it into perspective.
I think even small companies have the ability to train people. If you've got one person that's doing penetration testing and you hire someone that's entry level, you can set it up to where you can train them on specific things, like how to run Nessus or a vulnerability assessment tool, how to run Burp, that you can gradually get them up to speed. If they say, well, I don't have time to train you on Nessus, as we talked about, there's plenty of free videos on how to run Nessus and how to set up your own lab. So there's things you can do to help someone set them up for success. Because there's this concept, hit the ground running, as you said. Like, what does that mean in cybersecurity? Like, hit the ground running doing what? There's like 17,000 different types of jobs in cybersecurity alone. Are you an auditor? Are you managing the firewall? Are you doing pen testing? Are you doing wireless pen testing? Are you doing forensics? It's not like you can just hire someone off the street and expect them to hit the ground running without some of that training and mentoring. And I think even with a small organization, if they look at it from that perspective, like how to get someone started on incremental things and point them at some external resources is necessary to help them get up to speed, it's not going to take that much resources of your own to get them up to speed. And that's what we did in my organization. And if we don't do that, we're just going to complain about the skill shortage until like perpetuity. So we need to do something different anyway.
Yeah, and I mean, I can see advantages of bringing people in that are not coming with any, let's say, baggage, right? They're easily coachable. Maybe they don't have any bad habits. Like I've also heard people saying, I'd rather hire someone who's junior, train them up, look for someone hungry who won't come, like you said, with an ego. What is your opinion on that?
I think there's some validity there. For my organization, we hired a lot of people that they started out as an intern, then they went to part-time, and then they went to full-time. So we kind of like use that approach to measure if somebody was a good fit. It's sort of like the try before you buy, and then also see how hungry they were. Because some people say, I want to learn penetration testing, but if you're not passionate about it, you almost can't be taught it. You have to have some drive of your own. So we used that approach, which I think worked for us, and I think other organizations can use that approach because we had the ability to, like you said, to sort of like try before we ended up hiring someone full-time, but also to see if this person had an ego, what bad habits they had from a previous employer. Because a lot of people, like, they do come up with that baggage. They say, well, we did this over here, and we think you should do the same thing over here. And I'm like, well, we're a different organization. That's not how we operate over here. So you have to like make sure it's a good fit as well.
Would you say that companies should maybe revisit, maybe not the screening process, but the hiring committee to have more people involved and have less egos controlling the hiring process? Does that make sense?
I think it does make sense. I think it depends on the position. For my organization, what we did is we figured out what we needed in that role, like what type of person we needed, what type of traits, what type of attitude, if they would have to work with others, if they have to be client facing. We sort of like really dialed in what we needed in a role. And then we had people take an assessment to see if they even met the right criteria. Because if somebody doesn't want to talk to people, they're an introvert, and we're hiring for a position where we have to go over reports with the clients all the time, it may be problematic. So we sort of looked at that first, and then once somebody passed that criteria, we would bring them in for a short 20-minute interview, and if they passed that, they go to the next person. So we had like a process laid out, and it took me a while to do this process because when I first started, I would be freaking out thinking, okay, I need someone to do this instant response role. And the first 7 resumes that looked super technical, I'd interview those people, have them whiteboard some stuff and hire them. And then afterwards, I realized, well, they're not a good fit culturally. They're super technical and they're great technically, but they're causing problems and friction in my organization. They're upsetting clients. So, that's why I shifted it to look at the people, the person as a whole, and then the technical skills.
What you're referring to now, is that what you call the Trimetrics HD8?
Yeah, the Trimetrics is an assessment exam that basically looks at someone's behaviors, their motivations, their innate qualities, and gives you a good idea if they're a match for the position you're trying to hire someone for. As an example, if I'm going to hire somebody to do auditing, you wouldn't want to hire someone like me to do auditing. It would drive me literally insane, and I'd be a horrible auditor because I need variety, I need other things. But other people, they don't want to do pen testing, they'd rather do auditing. Because pen testing, like you could bang your head against the wall like 1,000 times, and the 1,000th the first time you break into something, right? So it's very frustrating. It's a different personality type than an auditor. So I think it's important that you make sure you're hiring the right type of person for the position, because the positions can vary drastically. And that's what that Trimetrics HD does.
Okay, yeah, that makes perfect sense. And let's talk a little bit about the talent that you already have. Many companies are running boot camps to bring people from IT over into cybersecurity roles. What are your thoughts on existing talent?
I think you should always look at your existing talent first because you already know they're a good cultural fit. It's a known entity. Basically, you know about this person. You kind of have an idea of their strengths and weaknesses because they're already part of your organization. So I certainly would look at them first to see if they are a good fit for a cybersecurity role.
And did you have success with this in your own company? And how did you manage this program if you had one?
In my company, we only did cybersecurity. So we had success in that regard where some people, they would do auditing, for instance, but they wanted to try penetration testing. So we, from a cross-training perspective, we would, when they had a little bit of downtime or they weren't as busy with auditing, we would have them shadow a penetration tester just to see if they really wanted to do it. And most of the time they're like, I don't want to do this because this is not what I thought it would be like. And this is the problem in our industry too. We make everything look like it's going to be super cool because we have these capture the flags, these hackathons, and all this stuff that makes cybersecurity look super sexy. But the amount of like super cool jobs in cybersecurity are actually kind of small, in my opinion. So it's a good, like if you're going to hire someone from your organization for a different role, it's good to give them a taste of it before you have them commit to it. And that's what we did in my organization was with the shadowing. And the same thing, if somebody did penetration testing, they wanted to teach a course, that's a very different skill set. Even though it's cybersecurity, we would have them sit through a course, maybe teach a module of the course, and they'd realize, you know what, standing up all day is hurting my feet. I don't really feel like dealing with all these questions from the students. And some people realize they don't want to do it. So I think it's good to give people a sample of what that role may look like.
I like this idea. And there was a phrase in your book which made me laugh, and I'd like to unpack it a little bit. You mentioned paper tigers. Can you talk a bit about your thoughts on paper tigers?
Yeah, I do talk about paper tigers in the book, and I've experienced thousands of paper tigers. A paper tiger is someone that they have a lot of growl. They walk the walk, but they can't talk the talk. Or they talk the talk, but can't walk the walk. And in cybersecurity, it's someone that has all these certificates. If you look behind them on their wall, they've got Sec Plus, CISSP. And I'm not trying to downplay these certificates. Some people actually know what they're doing. But they've got all these certificates. But then if you actually put them in front of a keyboard and ask them to do something, they like look at you like they have no idea what to do. And unfortunately, in our industry, we have thousands and thousands and thousands of paper tigers. And it's because we have these certification exams that are multiple choice exams, like Security Plus. And some of these organizations are trying to make the exams more experience-based. Like you have to know a little bit more than, how to answer a multiple choice question. But the reality is a lot of people go do a brain dump, which basically has a bank of questions, memorize all the answers, then go take the exam. And they don't really know anything about the industry other than, a few acronyms and a few definitions. And if we look at like adult learning theory, you've got knowledge, it's at the bottom. You got comprehension and you got application, let's just say. And we can go beyond that, but those are the three main ones. And all we're really learning is the knowledge part. We're skipping the comprehension and we're skipping the application. So we're using these certifications as a means to hire people, but we've hired people that know they understand some vocabulary and some definitions, but they don't really comprehend the concepts and they can't apply them. And I think some organizations are shifting, mainly in pen testing, it seems like, where you have like the OSCP, the CEH Master, where there's a practical component. But the rest of the exams are still multiple choice exams. And I think, if we're going to rely on multiple choice exams, we're going to get people that only have surface level knowledge, really, because you can't test comprehension and you really can't test application from my point of view. And that's why we have the paper tigers.
So, is it not one of the root causes of this vicious circle because companies are not that stupid to think that a certification is enough for you to get the job? But then why is the cert business booming if people are not getting jobs? Are people just kind of doing it in the hope that they will get a job? Like, is it just for them to their toes in the water? I'm just trying to understand what people think they're going to achieve with certs. What's the consensus?
Yeah, I'm not opposed to certifications. I think there's value in them. With like the Department of Defense, or if you're a Department of Defense contractor, there's this rule DoD 8570, which is going to be 8140, which requires you to have a specific certification to work in a cybersecurity or information assurance role. So a lot of people are getting the certifications to check the box as a Department of Defense contractor to work in a role that involves cybersecurity. So some employers, like defense contractors, are looking for the certification to check the box because that's required by who they have a contract with. Other employers are looking for the certification because they feel like they have to have, from an employer perspective, we have to have some screening criteria, right? So we want to say, well, do they need a degree? Do they need the certs? We use those as screening criteria, and I think there's some value in like saying someone needs a security plus as a screening criteria, but it doesn't mean they actually know anything. So you just have to keep that in mind. Like, it's no different than if someone has a 4-year college degree. It doesn't mean they know anything either. It means they spent 4 years in college, right? Someone can be educated, but not be smart, right? So there's a difference. I think we just need to keep that in mind.
So it's like your foot in the door. It can help you to land the interview.
Yes. I've done some videos in the past and things where I basically said, if you want to get in cybersecurity, learn the foundations. Get a Security Plus certification because it's like a foundational certification. Build your own lab because you can build a lab for free with eval copies of Windows, with Kali Linux. You can build everything for free. Don't only just learn this stuff in the Security Plus, but actually get some hands-on experience on your own. You don't have to wait to get a job to get hands-on experience. Because if you come to me as someone wanting to get hired, you tell me you studied for Sec Plus on your own, you got it. You built your own lab, you did this, you learned Active Directory, you learned how to use Kali Linux, you learned this, then that's going to be much more appealing to me than somebody that graduated college with a 4-year degree and got a certification, but doesn't really show any passion about the industry or drive to learn it on their own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there was one really funny comment. I think it was Jerome McGilvery. He said hackers do not have certs and they probably did not go to get degrees in cyber. So if we are not fighting fire with fire or using a scrappy startup mentality to fight back, like you said, we're losing the war on cybercrime.
Cybersecurity Heroes is brought to you by IronScales, an AI-powered, self-learning email security platform that helps security professionals proactively prevent, detect, and remediate phishing attacks in a matter of seconds, not hours or days. And we have an exclusive offer for our podcast listeners. Discover dormant phishing threats in your organization's mailboxes. Get a free 90-day scan back with a detailed report. Integrate in seconds with 2 clicks via API to Microsoft Office 365 and see what your current email security is missing. Go to ironscales.com/free scan to learn more.
Anyway, in your book, you talk about total intelligence. Why is this important as part of the fight against cybercrime?
Yeah, I define total intelligence as your brain or your mind, your body, which could be your gut, the chill down your spine, the hair on your arms can stand up, and your heart, basically. So our whole body has cells, right? And technical career fields like cybersecurity, we're just used to using our brain. In the terms of cybercrime and fighting cybercrime, I think it's important if we're trying to communicate with someone and we can tap into more than just our brain, that they are not really getting it, because we get the sense our gut is saying they're not understanding what we're saying because we're paying them more attention, then we can change how we communicate. Because in cybercrime, it's not like we're fighting the cyber criminals in hand-to-hand combat. We're talking to each other, we're talking to management, we're talking to clients, and we're working together. And if we can become better at communicating and better at sensing what's going on when we're having these conversations, it will improve our overall ability to get things done and to make sure our message is received properly. Because a lot of people will say things like, there is no budget for cybersecurity. A lot of the time, there's no budget because it was never explained in a way where the board of directors or the company leadership understood the true risk with cybersecurity. So we always just blame them where the ownership should be on us. And if we're talking to them and we're not understanding, we're not paying attention that they're not getting it or looking at it from an empathetic perspective where they're coming from, then we're not going to alter our communication.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that it's not explained in layman terms, or perhaps some are less risk averse than others. But I don't know the root causes for every scenario. But if you can explain in layman terms, if we fall for a ransomware attack, we could be down for a week, we could lose this much money, we could go out of business, etc., etc. I'm sure budgets would look different, but I'm not sitting at those board discussions, so I don't have the insights into those discussions, but perhaps you have more experience in this than I do.
Yeah, and it's not just discussions with the stakeholders. It's also like with me, I talk about this guy Doug in the book a lot. Doug's like a combination of a few people, but Doug is a real person, but I just added a couple people to make Doug, basically. So it's a combination of 3 people, really. With Doug, and we talk about the total intelligence, with Doug, my brain told me Doug was not a good fit for the organization. My gut told me that too. Like my gut hurt when I thought about Doug. But well, maybe Doug can change. Maybe Doug will not piss off another client. Maybe Doug will get along better with our team. Maybe he'll help us become more secure and our clients become more secure. So my heart, because I care about people, especially my employees, my heart overrode those other things basically. But if I would have just sat back and thought, you know what? My gut is telling me this. My brain is telling me this. I should probably listen to those 2 things and not just the heart, and got rid of Doug sooner. And then we would have hired someone better or different and being able to provide more security for our clients. So it shows up in different ways as well.
Yeah, and coming back to budget, when a breach happens, what type of conversations should happen between a CISO or whoever is leading the security team when they know budget could have been part of the issue? What can IT leaders, IT security leaders do to get that budget?
Well, I'm a believer that the meaning of communication is the response you get. So if your desired outcome is to get a budget for your division in cybersecurity, then you should understand where the other person is coming from, what their role is, what be successful for them, what they're concerned about, basically be able to put yourself in their shoes, and then change your communication in a way to where you get that budget. We often blame the person we're talking to as they're not understanding what we're saying, where the ownership should be on us to change how we're communicating in a way that it is understood. And sure, there's going to be situations where maybe the person actually understands you and they still don't want to give you a budget, but I rarely think it gets that far. It's typically, well, I told them X and they didn't understand it, so they're not going to give me a budget. Well, try to make them understand it, and this is what I would mention earlier, because if someone doesn't understand the real risk, of course they're not going to give you a budget, right? So, as cybersecurity professionals or as a CISO, that's why I said communication skills are much more important than technical skills. Because if I can talk about, open TCP ports on a firewall all day, but if I can't articulate the true risk we have, and if we get ransomware, the cost to the organization from a financial perspective and a reputation perspective, and oh, by the way, to prevent the ransomware, this is how much it's going to cost. So here's your return on the investment. If I can't articulate things in those terms, I'm not going to get the budget, and I'm not going to get management buy-in, really.
In your book, you talk about the secure methodology. Can you break down for us this methodology into the 7 steps that you mentioned?
Yeah, the secure methodology has 7 steps. Basically, one of the challenges I had in Alpine Security is my highly technical staff, very high IQ but low EQ, or not so great people skills, were causing problems with our clients and causing friction internally. So I did a lot of training with my team, EQ skills, communication skills. EQ skills is emotional intelligence, communication skills, and all these other things. And the stuff that ended up working became those 7 steps. The 7 steps are, the first one is awareness. So I talk about having self-awareness and how we often have these blind spots. I mentioned the concept of NLP or neuro-linguistic programming, but our brains are basically like computers. And if we hear something or there's a stimulus, it'll trigger a program. And before we know it, we ran the program. It's sort of like being an autopilot. So having the awareness of that and being able to hit like a control C and stop the program that is malicious and start a new program and build a new habit is important from an awareness perspective. The second step is mindset. A lot of us have a fixed mindset, but we really want to have a growth mindset. A fixed mindset is where we believe we're hardwired, like we can't change anything. We're just the way we are. A lot of people say, I'm just not good with people. I'm only good with computers. And that's a fixed mindset. A growth mindset, you might say, well, you know what? I'm not great with people, but I know I can get better because I'm going to be surrounded by people my entire life, right? And the third one is acknowledgement, the third step. As a leader, it's important you can acknowledge yourself before you can acknowledge others. For me, I've always had a difficult time acknowledging myself. You mentioned Ironman before. I would do an Ironman triathlon, which is pretty difficult. It's 140.6 miles in a 14-hour day for me. I would do one and I would never acknowledge myself. I'd just kind of be on to the next thing, looking forward. And then I realized, if I'm not acknowledging myself for something, I realized that this was showing up with my employees, that I wasn't acknowledging the things that they were getting done. And in cybersecurity, it's extremely important because we have to patch all 1,000 things. The cyber criminal just has to find one thing that we missed, right? And they break in and steal everything. And the fourth step is communication. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a believer that the meaning of communication is the response you get. So the ownership should be on you to change how you communicate so the other person actually receives the message and takes the action you want them to. The fifth step is monotasking. So it's the opposite of multitasking. Multitasking is where I'm talking to you, but I'm on the phone, I'm checking my email. We want to be monotasking for two main reasons. The first reason is we're much more productive. If you're context switching a lot, going from one thing to another, that takes up brain cells. So it's better to focus on one thing for an hour at a time and only do that one thing. That means if you're doing penetration testing, just do that. Turn off your Slack, turn off your phone, just do one thing at a time. And the second reason for monotasking is presence. So this goes back to the communication. If I'm present in the meeting, I'm going to be listening to somebody much better. I'm going to be listening for insight, which might help me get that budget because I can hear what they're saying. A lot of us listen for agreement instead of insight. We just listen to something to agree or disagree with. But if I'm fully present listening, then I'll receive information that will allow me to alter my communication in a way where I can build rapport with that person and maybe get the budget or whatever I'm trying to accomplish. And then the sixth step is empathy. So we like to focus too much on the differences, especially in cybersecurity. We're we're cybersecurity, that's sales, that's management. We always put everybody in these boxes and focus on the differences. So it's hard to understand somebody else's point of view if we're only focused on the differences. So with empathy, it's important to have some cognitive empathy and do some perspective taking, especially if you're trying to get the budget or something like that. And then the last step is Kaizen. Kaizen is a Japanese word that means constant and never-ending improvement. Whenever you start something new in life, you're going to have, some valleys before you get better. But as long as you're improving and you're taking the steps, that's what's important. None of these skills, you're going to flip a switch and be a master at it. Mastery is a journey. So it's important to have some perspective that just minor improvements and taking those steps is what's important.
Thanks so much. There are a lot of points in there that to me could potentially be linked with mental health and better mental health in the cyber workforce, because it's not something new and I'm sure you're aware of it, cybersecurity burnout. I don't know if you've seen this secure methodology having any effect on that, but what else would you boil this cybersecurity burnout to, and what advice would you give for people experiencing that, and how could companies prevent it?
Yeah, I think the steps in the secure methodology can certainly help. The acknowledgement step is particularly important. Like I said, it is stressful in cybersecurity because on the defense perspective, you have to get everything right. Like I said, and the criminal just has to find one way in. So there's a lot of pressure. And there's also this culture we've allowed, which is almost caused me to leave the industry. And that's why I wrote the book. This toxic culture, which is Like if I have a high IQ and I'm super smart, then I can treat people like however I want to. And I've actually worked with people that's what they said. They said, I'm smarter than everybody, so I can walk all over them, or I can do whatever to people. And that culture has been, I run into it like every organization I deal with, cybersecurity. That culture has been allowed, and that doesn't make it pleasant to go to work every day if you feel like you can't ask a question because your coworker is going to ridicule you for being stupid. Or there's going to be friction dealing with someone on your team because they're positioning themselves as being smarter than everybody else. So those things definitely contribute to burnout. And I think if people do apply the concepts in my book, then it will certainly help with that. Because it is about mental health overall, and we're people trying to do the best we can do. So why not have a pleasant experience as much as possible at your work environment?
Yeah, and that makes total sense. And I wasn't aware of the connection between this ego and burnout. That's an interesting observation. So I would say that budget is also an enabler to burnout because you're forcing your staff to wear multiple hats. And like you said, not every employee likes doing multiple things or specific things. And that, I would imagine, is another big cause of burnout.
I agree with that. Yeah. Not everybody wants to do auditing. Some people just want to do something technical. And if you're wearing multiple hats, it can definitely wear you out. And this is why it's important to know why you're getting into cybersecurity. If you, like I said, we kind of do ourselves injustice by making it sound like, I get the idea we're trying to attract people to the industry by making it look really cool with all these hackathons and capture the flags, but it's like giving people this false expectation, like you said. So they come into it thinking it's going to be one thing, and the reality is different. So they're more likely to get burned out when they realize that what they thought they're getting into is totally not what they got into, right? So it's a matter of setting the expectations up front as well.
So I'm no psychiatrist, so don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure one of the side effects of wearing multiple hats or multitasking is actually subconsciously causing anxiety. So maybe some people are not aware of where this anxiety is coming from. I'm not sure if you've heard that before, but just thought I'd mention it.
Yeah, I've heard that before, and I'm a believer in knowing yourself. That's why number one is awareness. So there's a lot of assessment exams you can take out there that are free. Like you can go to 16personalities.com and take a Myers-Briggs assessment exam for free, and it will give you an idea of what makes you tick. A lot of people don't do this, and they think they want to do one thing, but once they're in that role, they hate it. So if you can prevent that by understanding yourself better, then we can avoid things like burnout or people, their mental health being sacrificed because they're doing things they don't feel they're aligned to do. And like you said, it could be having to wear multiple hats. So I think it's important to understand yourself and what makes you tick. And, if like you only like to do one thing at a time, and then you go take a job that has you wearing multiple hats, that's probably not a good fit. And maybe you shouldn't even take that job. But if you like change all the time, then maybe that is a good job. So it's important to understand from an awareness perspective where you are and what aligns with you.
Great. This has been a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate your insights, and I highly recommend your book to anyone listening. So to close out the show, I want to move to the lighter section of the show, which I call the rapid fire questions. So if you could invite one or two people to our show, who would it be?
So the first person would be the top, I don't know who this person is, but the top cyber criminal that hasn't been caught, and have them explain what the world is like from their perspective. Because I think a lot of us people on the cyber defense side, we think we understand what the dark web is like. We think we know how these things work, but we really don't. So having, someone explain that. The second person I would invite is my partner, Gaia Ferreira. She's like a human behavior expert and has coached has 5,000 hours of coaching experience. So having someone that has a different perspective on the industry from a human behavior perspective, because we're ultimately all interacting as humans, I think would be an interesting conversation as well.
So luckily we have someone to provide a warm introduction.
we do, yes. Yeah.
Great. I'm sure I'll take you up on that.
Yeah, it'd be very interesting, I'm sure.
So what's the most overrated cybersecurity tactic in your opinion?
Buying products to solve problems like firewalls, DLP, anti-spam. The more things you buy, the more things you have to manage and the more things you have to patch. And I don't think there's any silver bullet, but we keep thinking like this next gen appliance is going to solve everything. And that's overrated. It's not going to work.
And what's the most underrated cybersecurity tactic?
Vulnerability management. I've met very few, if I don't think I've met any organizations actually that have vulnerability management dialed in, because most breaches are because of an unpatched or misconfigured system. So having a decent vulnerability management program is extremely important.
I think that's the first time I've heard on this show, so glad to have a different underrated response.
What do people normally say?
The usual patching and others.
Okay.
So yeah, you have to tune into the show and you'll catch up on all the responses. So what advice would you give to the younger Christian?
I would give myself the advice to get into personal development sooner, to really understand my mindset sooner, and to take more risk. I kind of wanted certainty and a stable life at the beginning. So, I bought the house, got married, had the white picket fence, the dog, and all that stuff. And it took me a while to realize that that was driving me crazy. So that's why I started a business and did freelance work. So the personal development work would have let me know that I'm more of a risk taker and I value those things more so than the stability, which, everyone wants you to go after stability because that's like what is defined as success by society. But that wasn't success for me. And I fell into that trap.
Oh, that's a great answer. And what's the biggest cyber mistake you ever made?
Okay. The biggest cyber mistake I ever made was quite some time ago. I used to play the game World of Warcraft. And there was a South Park episode where the characters were playing in World of Warcraft in South Park. And some people at work were telling me about that episode. So I downloaded it on the same computer I played World of Warcraft on, from a peer-to-peer system. I downloaded the South Park episode and watched it on that computer. Embedded in that video of the South Park episode was a keylogger. So like the next day I was at work and I got an email from Blizzard, who makes World of Warcraft, that said my password had been changed and I didn't change my password. So basically somebody had captured my password from World of Warcraft. It logged in, stole my character, sold all my character stuff, ran around the world for several days because I had to prove my identity back to Blizzard in order to get control of my account again. And then when I came back to, logged in, I got control of my account. My character was naked. All of her stuff was gone. And I felt uncomfortable playing that character that had taken me so long to build up to this high level because the character was doing stuff in the world that I didn't know about. So I deleted that character and had to start over. So that was probably the biggest cybersecurity mistake.
That's a very funny story. Luckily, it wasn't with grave consequences.
That's true. Grave at the moment, but it really wasn't that big a deal.
And that's actually exactly why I asked this question, not to put my guests on the spot, but one of my past guests was like, I really would love to hear all the other guests' cyber mistakes to put my mistakes into perspective, because what you think is major, someone else, it's like, it's nothing, water off a duck's back. Cool. So if you could ask one question of your peers, what question would you ask them?
I would ask them what method or what tactic they've used that works to effectively communicate cybersecurity risks to stakeholders. Yeah. Because like what we talked about earlier, the budget, we struggle with these same issues. So if someone has a way to figure out how to communicate, let's leverage that.
100%. And a bonus question for our CEO and founder, what would you ask him?
I would ask him how important he thinks culture is to the organization and if cultural fit outweighs technical skills.
Great. So it just happens to be that we're doing an episode next week on culture and HR. So if anyone is interested, and of course, if you are, so definitely tune into that episode next week. We're hosting it with the Cybermaniacs. So Christian, this has been an awesome conversation. Thank you so much for your time. But before we close out, can you give a quick pitch on your company and your services if anyone would like to obviously, reach out and ask you any questions or help with your services?
Yeah, so I sold my company, Alpine Security, to Cerberus Sentinel. So Cerberus Sentinel, we like to describe ourselves as a talent acquisition company. So we do cybersecurity only from a service perspective, but we haven't grown the capabilities organically. We've acquired companies that are really good at things, like really good at penetration testing, really good at auditing. So we have everything under one umbrella, really, and it's like a one-stop shop for cybersecurity services that are all, leaders in that specific sector of cybersecurity.
Awesome. And if anyone would like to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to connect?
Yeah, they can go to my website, christianespinoza.com, or LinkedIn are probably the two best ways. And my book, The Smartest Person in the Room, is on Amazon as well.
Great. So thank you again. And thanks everyone for tuning in to today's episode of Cybersecurity Heroes. And to the rest of you, we'll see you next time.
That's a wrap for this episode of Cybersecurity Heroes. Practical and experiential knowledge on a day in the life of security heroes. Catch our next episode by subscribing through your favorite podcast platform. If you're listening in Apple Podcasts, please leave a rating for the show. They really help a lot. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.